Welcome to another episode of the Plutus Awards podcast. I'm your host, Chris Browning. Our community is filled with hundreds of stories from creators and entrepreneurs just like you. And through this podcast, we plan to share these stories from bloggers to podcasters, writers, speakers, and more. Let's meet today's guest.
Hi, I'm Stewart, and I am a previous winner of a Plutus Award for Best Debt-Focused Blog, which incidentally was simply just show notes for my podcast, Money Plan SOS. But I'm currently the owner and operator of Stewart Podcast Productions. I started my podcast back in 2010 as an outreach for my small business, my financial coaching business, but then I fell into a career as a podcast editor for many of my peers in the personal finance space. And I do it and I love it because I love the medium of podcasting and how it can be used to spread the message of financial literacy to people all over the world.
I'm here with Stewart. I'm very excited to be talking with him. I think I've known him for at least a couple of years now, if not longer. Steve, how's it going?
Thanks, Chris. I'm really excited to be here. This is going to be fun.
You know, I think Steve was one of the first people I talked to when I was starting my podcast. I don't know if you remember this, Steve. You actually helped me with some of the initial setup and getting started with Libsyn to host my show. And because I had no idea what I was doing. And I really appreciate you taking the time to help me out.
Hey, I love it. Anything that helps a person who speaks on personal finance to make their message more clear, I love to help.
You were more than helpful. And you had the reputation, I think, in the community for being the go-to podcast guy to talk to. Because I know when I went online and I was in the FinCon group looking for help, everyone was like Steve Stewart. Their name I think yours was the only name that popped up from just multiple people. So I figure you'd be the best person to sit down and talk to about podcasting in general. And, you know, we can even talk about, for those who haven't started a podcast yet, those in the early stages, or even those who have been doing it for a while, some of the things that go into a podcast and some of the things that you've experienced, because you've been on both sides. You've been behind the microphone yourself with your own podcast, and you've edited, I don't even know how many podcasts at this point. Do you keep track how many podcasts are you editing right now?
I could easily count them, and I can tell you right now it's about 21.
21, that's a lot of podcasts.
Yes, it is. A lot of different shows. It's great. I love it.
And so I think you have a good perspective because you're seeing a variety of shows, variety of styles, variety of practices that all go into this, because it is a lot of work. There's a lot that goes into this. Well, first of all, how did you even get into this whole business of, starting a podcast and editing? How did all this come about?
Yeah, well, in 2003, I guess you'd say 2003, bumped into this guy on the radio called Dave Ramsey and started getting into the personal finance space just by listening to his radio show. And then podcasts came around in 2005, 2006 to me. And I started downloading all these different podcasts and really liked the medium because I could consume it while I was doing other things. So that just kind of gave me this passion for the audio medium, which, there was blogging back then, which was really big. And I really just wasn't a great writer. So for a financial coaching business that I started in 2007, I started writing and blogging, and I thought, okay, I'm going to do some coaching on the side here in my local community. But it was in 2010 that I launched Money Plan SOS, the podcast, which supported that as an outreach, kind of a marketing thing. And I, again, just fell in love with the medium and the way that you could have an intimate relationship with somebody just through their earbuds, because you're literally centimeters from their brain. And over time, people get to know you, like you, trust you. And that's just, I think, is a better approach to reaching somebody than the billboard or the one-time advertisement in front of their face saying, hey, this is something you need. I think people buy once they do know, like, and trust you.
Yeah, exactly. And it is amazing how I can call it intimate that podcasting is, and how I've come across people and who've listened to the show and they're like, they know me, and I'm like, I've never talked to you before. How do you know me? But it's you forget that you're going along with them on walks, in the car, all these different places, and they're really getting a chance to connect with you. So I think it's really cool that you've kind of started out with your interest and your passion in personal finance, and it kind of branched out into all these different areas.
Yeah, and I can tell you the first time somebody approached me that I had never met, they said, "Oh, I love your show," and it was Felix Montalera. He was at FinCon. Everybody's listening to the show should be familiar with FinCon. He was at FinCon 2013 here in St. Louis, which is where I live, and we were at a after event thing. He came up to me. He's like, Steve Stewart, you're Steve Stewart. I'm like, yeah. He's like, I listen to your podcast. And it just blew me away that a stranger I'd never heard of, was a fan of the show. And that just right there, that was already 3 years in, just proved to me that, there's a lot of people out there you'll never meet. And that will bring you down, but you get one person and that totally makes your day.
Oh, no, it really does. It really does. I want to give a shout out to Maria, who was probably not listening to this podcast, but she was the first person I ever met in person at Aaron Lowry's book event. She came up to me and said she listened to the show. And you're right. I'd never had that happen before in my life. And that like changed everything. Like if I didn't hear from anyone else, that alone gives you like the motivation to kind of keep this thing going.
Yeah. How do they recognize you though? I mean, your picture isn't on the artwork, so how do they know? And that's another thing too, is
Yeah.
that social presence. And now it's a little easier because Facebook pages, Instagram, your face is out there. Back then, you had to put your face on your show artwork. Otherwise, people had no idea who the podcaster was.
Yeah, exactly. Things have changed with social media for sure.
Yeah.
All right. So, Steve, what is something that someone who's like, okay, I like the way this sounds. I want to do a podcast. What would be your suggestion for someone who wants to start, like, I guess, dipping their toe into the world of podcasting? Like, what does that entail for someone who has no experience getting this thing started?
The first thing, gosh, there's so many little things because you're going to see those in a lot of different Facebook groups of questions about, hey, where do I host? What kind of mic do I get? What if I want to do in-person interviews or over the internet? What should I use? You just got to find something and start using it. Probably the biggest delay in me launching Money Plan SOS back in 2010 was I didn't think I was ready. There was a little imposter syndrome there, of course, but then it was the whole, do I have the right gear? Do I have the right message?
Yeah.
Do I have my branding in place? All this stuff. And really, I think gear was probably, I used that as my reason not to start yet. And a little bit of technicality on how do I get my podcast on my website, which, by the way, you don't put your podcast on your website. You have a landing page on your website for your podcast. There's a difference. So as far as media hosting, pick one. I suggest Libsyn. A lot of my clients use Libsyn. There's Blueberry. There's Simplecast. There's Podbean. Those are all respected host providers. That's where you put your file and serve it out from there. That way you don't have to worry about anything. Website, just go with a WordPress or Squarespace, whatever you're comfortable with. Microphone, you know what, Chris? You and I are using the same microphone. And I don't know if people can tell. It sounds pretty decent.
Oh, yeah.
It's the ATR 2100. It's USB straight into our computer. We can talk over Skype or Squadcast or Zencaster or any of those services. And it doesn't require any extra equipment. But if we wanted to, we could plug this into a mixer and get really complicated. And we're not going to go there because you said this is a person who wants to start a podcast. And I don't want to get that complicated. So the gear shouldn't get in the way. Where to put your files shouldn't get in the way. Website presence, the branding is probably a bigger complexity than the website. How do I get my branding, my image and my name and my little description that gets people enticed into reading and listening to my show? Those types of things I think are probably bigger than, the gear.
Yeah, I agree. And I know that's definitely a sticking point. I know for me, I spent probably 2 years stressing about how I was going to start a show. And I never made any, took any action just because the fear and you feel like there's all these choices and you don't want to make a mistake. And I definitely agree with you. Just you gotta start somewhere. Don't let that bog you down and prevent you from actually taking any type of action because you can wait forever.
Yeah. And another tip would be write out what your first 10 episodes are going to be about. You don't have to stick to that schedule, but what's episode 1? What's episode 2? What's episode 3? And that will give you a game plan to then start hitting the record button or reaching out to people as guests. And it might be 6 months before you actually do launch a podcast, but you've got a game plan. You get some practice in. If you don't like something, throw it away and do it over again. You may not do that if you're interviewing Pat Flynn because he's a hard guy to get a hold of a second time. I had a friend who recorded and he hadn't turned on his mic.
Oh, no. I've been there.
Yeah. Everybody has to test their mics first. First thing you do is come on. Hey, by the way, can you hear this? This is a test that everybody needs to do. Can you hear this? And if they can hear it, then you know your mic's on. But if you're scratching something else and they hear it, then your mic isn't picked up. So test your mic. Anyway, he recorded with Pat Flynn, but his mic wasn't on. And the audio was horrible. Pat Flynn sounded great. And that's all he cared about. And so he put it out anyway. He's like, I can't call Pat Flynn back because of my audio to get another one. So, that's a real important thing to remember.
Okay. Yeah, those little things that you don't really think about, but I think all of us have experienced at one point or another who've been podcasting. There's some things you got to make sure are working right before you hop in there.
Yeah, you're not initiated as a podcaster until you forget to hit record or you don't have the mic selected in whatever you're recording with.
Exactly. It's a learning experience.
Yes.
You'll never forget after that. All right. And Steve, I know we have some other people who are listening who aren't just beginners. We have some people who've been podcasting for a while, who they've gotten a routine going. Maybe they've been going for several months or several years. This may be a difficult question, but what is something that you wish podcasters knew about or would implement in their practices? Since I'm sure you've heard thousands of podcasts at this point.
A couple things. I'm more of a technical guy, but let me go on to the more of the procedural or the preparation. Preparation is really important. Have an idea. You could write out the questions you think you're going to ask, but then the discussion might take a completely different turn. If somebody mentions that 2 years ago they stopped drinking and they've been dry for 2 years, and now you go off on a tangent on this whole, reinvention of this person that made them into the whatever rock star that you're talking to right now. They might be a new author and they got a really great message, but oh wait, you were alcoholic for 15 years and you kicked the habit for 2, and there might be some great stories that come out of there. Don't be afraid to let that happen. That's fine. More on the technical side is mic technique. Of course, know how your microphone works.
Very important.
Yeah, don't put your mouth right on the microphone. You want to talk over it or around it, but not directly into it. And what I mean is there's some microphones where they're called top fire, which actually the very top of the microphone, it's kind of flat, and that's what you want to talk into, but you don't put your mouth right over it and point down and talk into it. There's side fire, which are microphones that pick up the sound from the side. You'll see this mesh round area around it, and that's where you talk into. You want to have some kind of a spit guard or something in there, not to keep you from spitting on your mic, but really to keep you away from your mic. Because then if you're using a mic like what we're using, which is what your traditional microphone looks like if you see somebody singing on stage, it looks kind of like that. Microphone's got the rounded top. What you don't want to do is get right on top of it. And here, let me take off my windscreen. Everybody can hear that, right? And now, if I talk with plosives, you can kind of hear, the popped P's. Well, if I can angle my mic to where it's pointed to my nose, the tip of my nose, but pretend it's a shotgun. And if you pull the trigger, the bullet should just scrape my nose, but not hit my face anywhere. If you can imagine how that, now, Chris, you can see me, but the people who are listening are like, what is he talking about? You have it angled so that if it was a shotgun and it shot a bullet, it would just scrape the tip of your nose. The microphone will pick up your mouth, the sound of your mouth, but you're not directly talking into it. You're kind of talking past it or over it. And that's probably the best mic technique, because then you're close, and the mic's going to pick up you instead of all the noise around you, if you've got the right microphone for that. Most people do. And you're not going to get those plosives by talking directly into it.
Well, I'm happy people can't see it because my mic is definitely not turned the right way. Then I think you've even told me this tip before, Steve. So don't look at me. Don't look at what I'm doing right now.
Yeah, you've got yours below you angled up, and you could get some plosives, but again, it's not right in front of your mouth. I can see you smiling while you're talking, which means if the camera angle is there, it's above your microphone, and that's a good thing. One final thing. This is another technical thing. We talked about testing your mic. Go on, say, hey, can you hear this? And have them do the same thing. And if you can hear what they're rubbing and it's the microphone that you want, then great, everything's fantastic. But you've got to always, if you're interviewing somebody over the internet, you've got to wear earphones, headphones, earbuds. You cannot hear. I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna do it to you. We're gonna do it.
All right.
I'm putting on the speakers.
Oh yeah. I hear it right there. I can hear myself.
You can hear yourself coming back through. If I wasn't wearing earbuds like right now, I'm going through speakers. If this was my laptop, it would ruin the audio. And some recorders, it would just ruin it because it's echo. I'm going to plug my headphones back in because this just makes me mad. And you're going to get guests who have no microphone, and that's fine. But they've got to have earbuds. They've got to have some kind of a headset. They've got to be able to hear things. They got to hear you, but not through the same audio that's going to come back into the mic and back to you. It'll ruin the audio if you did that.
That's a great point. Yeah, because I think that is something that if you're bringing on guests because not everyone's a podcaster you're going to be talking to. Not everyone's going to be set up like you said. And I think that's just one simple thing that you can do to help improve the audio, because everyone has a pair of headphones, regardless of what they do. Someone has a pair of headphones lying around somewhere in their house. And you're right, it makes a huge difference because no one wants to hear an echo of another voice, while you're listening to a show. I think that's a great tip. I love these examples. You give us actual real examples that we can hear and feel. It's like a podcast ASMR going on right here. So well, no, thanks, Steve. And I wanted to leave you with this last question just to wrap it all up here. You've moved into this space. You work with a lot of different people. You edit a lot of podcasts. And I think you kind of touched on this a little bit in the very beginning of our conversation. But what is something that you really feel podcasting brings to your life, or has just changed things for you as far as being a listener and actually working in the industry as well?
That's a tough question to answer.
I know. I was saying it. I was like, oh man, this is a tough one here.
I mean, I
sorry
love
to throw it at you.
Yeah, I love the medium. I love the intimacy you can get. I love the way that you can communicate ideas and people can internalize things that they hear before they act on it. Most people aren't pulling the trigger on something when they're listening to a podcast. And some podcasts are just for entertainment value. Telling a story like Serial, Hardcore History, those are all storytelling. Of course, with Hardcore History, you're really learning something too, which is interesting.
Yeah.
With the personal finance space, which is what I love, is I would be editing a interview or a topic of somebody that's talking about something that I completely disagree with. And I could shoot them down with facts and figures. And it's like, no, this is wrong. But of course, I'm not going to do that. But by hearing that message, I'm hearing the other side. And I can then compare what I know with this new information. I can go and seek it out. That's what got me into personal finance in the first place. I was listening to Dave Ramsey on the radio. I was like, what are you talking about? Pay off the mortgage early. What are you talking about? Credit cards? That's ridiculous. And I found out he was right. But if I hadn't compared my original beliefs and kept a mind open to what I was just hearing now on the radio, or eventually I was just listening to him on the podcast, then I wouldn't have ever made that change. I would just been walking blindly through life with the only information that I ever heard. So podcasts can give you that exposure to other ideas, to other things. And if you're going to it with an open mind, which you are if you're listening to a podcast, you have a better understanding of how things really work in your life, rather than, one person says, hey, you got to buy VTSAX and that's it.
Yeah. It is such a powerful medium. And it's such a great way to either, one, learn something or connect with people with, like you said, different ideas who are experts in different fields. But it's also a great way if you want to connect with the community to do that as well, and also have them come together and start a conversation in a way that I think it's much different than writing. Because like you, I'm not a big writer. That's not something I enjoy doing, but I love making podcasts and I love listening to podcasts because it's such a fun, portable, entertaining medium that I think really fits for anyone. Anyone can find something they want. There's so many podcasts, you can find something that's going to fit what it is that you're into and that you like. And Steve, I really appreciate your time. And I thank you for coming on, sharing some great tips, giving us some good examples of what podcasters can do or what people want to do, but build podcasts can do to get started or to refine their process. And before we go, I want to give you the opportunity to let people know if they have any questions, or they want to reach out to you, or they want to just learn more about what it is that you're doing. How can they find you and how can they connect with you?
That's super simple. You can just go to stevestewart.me. That's Steve, STEWART.me. There's 2 big buttons on there. One says schedule call. If you got questions, I'll give you 30 minutes. Set up the time. Let's have a chat. And the other one's about how to edit your own show, which if you want to learn how to edit your own show, I've got a course for that too.
Oh, perfect. And Steve is a wealth of knowledge. I think I've learned so much from you, either just talking to you or in the groups that you run on Facebook. So definitely, if you're interested, if you have any questions about podcasting, definitely reach out to Steve. You will not be disappointed. So thanks again, Steve. Appreciate your time.
Yeah, and I am a former Plutus Award winner. Here's my award. Chris is looking at it right now.
This is when we need video right here to show.
So yeah, I'll take care of you, especially if you're in the personal finance space. I will take care of you. Just contact me, stevestewart.me.
I appreciate all of you joining us here again for another episode, and it's always a great time when I get a chance to speak with Steve, so I really hope you all enjoyed our conversation. Next week, I have the pleasure of speaking with Ashley Barnett. I just love hearing her story. Ashley was able to transition from a job that she did not love to working with some of the largest creators in our space. It is just a great story, and I enjoyed every minute of our conversation together, and I think you will too. So make sure that you are subscribed so that way you can get that episode and more from the Plutus Awards podcast. You can learn more about our guests and the Plutus Awards podcast at plutusawards.com/podcast and on Instagram at Plutus Awards. Thanks so much for joining us here, and remember to keep creating.